It is so tragic what's been unfolding, not just in Ukraine, but there's also war taking place in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. Thousands of people have been killed and close to 1 million are homeless in the Middle East. Speeches from most of the party leaders here in Canada have shown their support for Israel, but we haven't heard a lot from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and his party just yet. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, why are we not hearing from Singh and the NDP?
Well, he was holding his national NDP convention in Hamilton, Ontario over the weekend, and the issue of Israel was one that he was feeling pressure on from part of his base. There's part of the NDP base that simply does not like or support Israel. They see themselves more aligned with the Palestinians, which is normally fine, but in the face of a horrific terrorist attack like what we witnessed over Thanksgiving weekend, you cannot stand with Hamas. And Jagmeet Singh, in his previous statements, has done a very good job of putting out the right words and saying the right things. That, he denounces the terrorism. He considers Hamas a terrorist organization. Pretty much everyone but CBC does. We'll get to that in a bit. But, on Monday, it was the first time that the parties and the MPs were assembled in the House of Commons since the terror attacks. After question period, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood up and gave a very good speech, about 10 minutes long, where he said, make no mistake, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They are not freedom fighters. They are not a resistance. And he pushed back against, talking points that some within his own party's base would support, that this is a resistance, that these are freedom fighters. Pierre Poilievre stood up, gave a very good speech saying there can be no negotiation with Hamas, that just as President Obama had to destroy Osama bin Laden, Israel has to destroy Hamas, which has been not just a threat to the people of Israel, but to Gaza. Even Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, made very clear where he stood. But Jagmeet Singh conspicuously wasn't there. It was Edmonton MP for the NDP, Heather McPherson, that stood up. And she gave a pretty good speech, but there are people in the party who have been calling out McPherson since the weekend for being a sellout. So the NDP has an anti-Semitism problem. It has a problem with people who believe that Hamas are freedom fighters, that this is a decolonization struggle. And so all those DEI words that we've been hearing about thrown into training sessions and, into affirmations that are said before meetings, those are coming back to bite the NDP in ways that, for the most part, Jagmeet Singh has done a good job of tamping down on anti-Semitism, just like Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair before him. But it keeps rearing its ugly head, including at the provincial level here in Ontario, where, let's remember, even though they might be the Alberta NDP or the Ontario NDP or the federal, it's one federated party, unlike all the others. They consider themselves one party. So a smear on one is a smear on all.
Brian, the Hamas is listed as a terrorist organization, not only with the Canadian government, but with the Americans, Britain, the EU, Japan, Australia, the list goes on and on. Us here at Bridge City News, we refer to Hamas as a terrorist organization, but many of the mainstream media are still not doing it, including the CBC. Why do you think that is?
CBC has long had a policy of not referring to groups as terrorists, but if you look at their coverage of the attack on the Muslim family, the murder of, I believe it was 4 of 5 members of this Muslim family that was out for a walk in London, Ontario. They described that man who committed those attacks as a terrorist. He's facing terrorism charges. If there's a story about somebody on the far right, they use the terms terrorist without always attributing it to someone else. But when it comes to Hamas, they say, oh no, our policy is we don't call groups terrorist organizations. We let politicians do that, and then we attribute it to them because we should not be making that judgment call. It is clear when you look at what Hamas did over that weekend of attacks that it was terrorism. It defies reason that you wouldn't call it terrorism. So CBC has been facing a lot of pressure. Brodie Fenlon, who's their editor-in-chief, put out a column basically describing why it is. When I first heard that in the hours after the attack, that CBC journalists were told, don't call Hamas terrorists, I thought, no, they can't be that bad. I checked it out with a couple of CBC journalists. They said, yeah, no, it's true. Not all of them, by the way, are comfortable with that. Some of them are upset at what they have to do, but it is, you have to follow your employer's instructions. And then CBC spokesperson defended it. Now Brodie Fenlon, they're going to be dragged before a parliamentary committee on this. Deputy Conservative leader Melissa Lantsman saying that she wants to hear directly from them in a parliamentary committee, because if you can't call what just happened terrorism, then you've lost the plot.
Brian, we've seen a wide variety of rallies in support of both Hamas and Israel. It appears as though some Liberal MPs are feeling some pressure to kind of downplay the Israeli side and give more emphasis to the Palestinian cause. Have any politicians gone as far as to say Hamas was justified in their attacks?
Not on the Liberal side, and not anyone that I've seen at the federal side. We do have one New Democrat member of the Ontario legislature, an MPP, or as you would call them in Alberta, an MLA, who not only put out a statement that blamed Israel for the attacks, but marched in rallies, or marched in a rally on Thanksgiving Monday, where the anti-Semitic chants and slogans were sung, where they played the sound of the Israeli early warning air raid siren, and then chanted "Zionist hide, Zionist hide." She has not been fully called to task for that by her party, or quite frankly, by members of the Queen's Park Press Gallery. But there's been some statements put out by Liberal MPs that were not fully in line with where their leader stood. And I thought, they're obviously feeling pressure. And if you represent a large Muslim population or a large Arab Canadian population, obviously you're going to feel different pressure than if you represent a large Jewish population. And you have to represent your constituents, and it might be your own viewpoint as well. But thankfully, none of them have gone that far as what we've seen with some politicians, with some union leaders, where they praise the resistance. I can't stress it enough. Kudos to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for telling people on his side, Hamas is not a resistance movement. They are not freedom fighters, because that's what some of the union leaders, some of the activists, some of the student unions have been putting out there. And it is repugnant that they do so. So let's see how long this solidarity with Israel lasts. My guess is that as Israel begins its ground offensive into Gaza to take out Hamas, which they must do, that some of that support is going to crumble, because Israel is going to defend itself. And, people will say Israel has a right to defend itself. And then when it does, they'll say, oh, but not that way. No, Israel has the right to defend itself. If it was a proportionate attack, if they did the same things to Hamas that Hamas did to Israel, I would be rightly outraged. They're going to take more care, more caution than that.
Now, there have been calls to ban or criminalize the glorification of terrorism at many of these rallies across Canada supporting Hamas. Brian, will we actually see legislation introduced to see this come to fruition?
I don't think so. And to be quite frankly, I hope not. Not because I support what these people are saying, but because I do believe in freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And if somebody holds that view, I want to know who they are so that I can denounce them. I've been calling for people to shun those who back Hamas. I've been saying that you are no longer welcome in polite society. And just like we wouldn't treat a politician or a union leader or a university student union president with any respect if they were holding Nazi rallies, we shouldn't have any respect for them or treat them with any respect or deference if they are out there supporting Hamas. We should shun them. We should ostracize them. Criminalizing them, though, I'm a bit concerned about. When the government starts deciding who can say what and when, that is a very slippery slope. And we saw just a little while ago that the Trudeau government wanted to criminalize any questioning of, what did they call it, the denialism of the grave sites at residential schools. And then, there were searches done of some of the ground where people had said ground-penetrating radar had found graves, and they said, oh, there's no graves there. It's not that there were no graves or no deaths. We know that that happened, but that some of the claims that had been made may not be accurate. And the government wanted to criminalize anyone questioning that. I think that's a dangerous place to go on that front. I think it'd be dangerous to go on this front. There was a young woman who appeared at a rally in a suburb of Toronto over the weekend saying that Hamas is a resistance movement and they're justified in everything they do. And she said this while wearing machine gun earrings. Well, her interview was broadcast and now she's unemployed. So she's faced consequences for her glorification of terrorism. We need more of that. I'm not sure that going the criminal route is actually the best route. If you're going to advocate violence, then sure, we should be looking at criminalizing advocating violence. But I'm uncomfortable on this other topic.
Now, there's still a number of Canadians in Israel, Brian. How are evacuation plans coming along?
Well, they were a bit slow in getting going. We had the whole issue of the government saying the embassy was open when it wasn't. Not sure why they lied about that when they knew the truth would come out. They didn't pre-position a plane in Athens or Cyprus like they should have ahead of time, but they have run several flights in and out now. People who are in the West Bank are now exiting into Jordan. They're able to get on flights over to Athens and then from Athens home. So that's good. Getting people out of Gaza is the tough part, though. We've evacuated many, hundreds from Israel. And then there are some who have decided that they're going to stay, people who are joining up with the IDF reserves and such. But Canadians who are in Gaza, they are in a very difficult situation. Israel is telling people in Gaza to move to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is saying, don't you dare, and basically trying to block people in because they want to use the civilian populations as human shields, as cannon fodder, if you will. So getting Canadians out of there is a very difficult task, and I'm not sure what the government's going to do. And it's hard to criticize them on it because everyone else is trying to get their foreign nationals out and having no luck because of Hamas.
Let's switch gears for just a moment here, Brian. The Supreme Court of Canada recently ruled that the Impact Assessment Act, also known as Bill C-69 or the No More Pipelines Law, was found to be unconstitutional. But it wasn't struck down. So what's the difference and what comes next?
So this was a reference case by the Alberta government, supported by, I believe, every provincial and territorial government in the country, because while it was dubbed the No More Pipelines Act, it was really the No More Anything Act. Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, as I've told you before, he was trying to build a small gas-powered electrical generating station to work as backup baseload power for a wind and solar project. And the federal government was still fighting him on that. He's trying to build wind and solar, but you need the baseload power. And they were saying, no, you can't do that. Here in Ontario, they're trying to stop a highway, a provincial highway. When did the federal government get involved in that? Or they've tried to stop housing projects. They wanted to be the zoning department. So every premier across the country backed Alberta in this fight. And so because it was a reference case, the law wasn't struck down, but the Supreme Court did say that it is largely unconstitutional in how they go about deciding which projects to assess and how they're assessing them, that it goes beyond the Section 91, Section 92 division of powers outlined in the Constitution. I'm surprised that they went there. I'm glad that they did, because this law was clearly an egregious violation of the Constitution when it comes to who is responsible for what. The federal government decided they wanted to usurp the powers of provincial governments, even municipal governments, on what could be built and where, in ways that the founding fathers of Confederation would have found unbelievable, abhorrent and unbelievable. But they went there. So what comes next? They can't apply it the way they have been. But I think what we're going to see is the Trudeau government try and rescue as much as they can. But there are parameters from this decision. It wasn't unanimous. That doesn't mean it doesn't stand, though. And if the federal government continues to try and push through in ways that the court has said they can't do, well, then expect more court fights. This has cost the economy of Canada billions and billions of dollars. The billions just in lost investment in the Alberta oil sands, but also in industries and developments straight across the country. This was a horrible bill, horrible law. I'm glad the court found the way that it did.
I watched an interview with Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault about the ruling from the Supreme Court of Canada, 5-2 striking down Bill C-69, essentially, like you said, saying it's unconstitutional. He referred to the matter as the opinions of the judges, not the ruling of the judges.
Yeah, well, the Liberals like to say that Conservatives don't respect the judiciary, that they don't respect the courts, and then this is how they act when a ruling they don't like comes out. It's like when a news report reports something the government doesn't like. They call it misinformation, disinformation, or they claim that the report in the Globe this morning was false.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.